Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Bruner. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Youth and Family Services Principal Consultant at the Colorado State Library. And I will be your facilitator today. We have some really amazing presenters that I'll turn the session over to shortly. So you all are at a Talking Teen Services presentation, which is a series of webinars and panel discussions hosted by the Colorado State Library on topics relevant to library professionals who work with teens in your communities of service. And so this series and all of the Colorado State Library's youth services offerings are created by the librarians of the Youth and Family Services team. And our staff positions and operating expenses are paid for by grant funding from the Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services, which allows us to offer these sessions to you all at no cost. So at the end of the session, I am going to ask you to please complete a survey, and you will be able to complete the survey by checking the box with my name, Kate Bruner, on it, and then putting CTS Understanding Teens 1 as the label for the session. If you're watching this on a recording, you're also welcome to fill out that survey if you have feedback for us. So, last thing, before I introduce today's presenters, they have provided the slides and their handout in advance. And so here's where you can find that if you'd like to go ahead and access it now and be able to have that open during the presentation. Okay, so thank you for your patience and this overview of today's logistics. And I am going to hand things over to our fantastic presenters today, which I'm really excited about the session they're about to provide. So I'm going to let Catherine take it from there, and I hope you guys enjoy this fantastic part one of a part 3 series we have available for you.
All right. From the people I can see, can I get a thumbs up that you can see my screen? It should be the Understanding Teen slide. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is part 1 of a 3-part series that we'll be doing. And so we're excited to be with you today. We are going to start with some introductions. So as Kate mentioned, if you would like, we would love to know where y'all are coming from, what work you're doing, if it's with teens, if it's with future teens, former teens, anything that you would like to share, and we will introduce ourselves. My name is Catherine. My pronouns are she, her, and this is me on the left here, and wonderful flannel shirt in the late 90s with an original Nokia brick cell phone that probably still works wherever it is. So I'm the supervisor of teen services with Arapahoe Libraries. I've been with the library system for about 14 and a half years, and I spent most of that time as a teen services librarian focused on outreach and staff training. And now I get to work with and oversee all of the wonderful librarians who do that work. And I will let Anush and Erica introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Anush, and I am a teen services librarian at the Arapahoe Libraries. And this is a picture of me on my 16th birthday. I have been working in public libraries since 2008, and I have been working with youth and teens as a librarian since 2015 in Colorado and Arapahoe Libraries for the last 3 years, and prior to that in several libraries in the Los Angeles area.
Hello, I'm Erica. I'm also she, her pronouns. That is me on the far right. I like to say that our teen photos represent the spectrum of teen emotions, and you can clearly see where I am on that spectrum. I'm pretty sure I was in 8th grade, also rocking the flannel and these necklaces that are making a comeback, those chokers. I've been seeing them a lot lately, so I was just ahead of the trend. I'm not sure. I've been with Arapahoe Libraries as a teen services librarian for about 3.5 years. Anush and I actually started on the exact same day. Prior to that, I bounced around a few different types of libraries. Actually, I've been in an academic library, I've been in a school library, I've been in other public library systems here in Colorado. until I started with ALD.
Awesome. So a few logistics before we get into the content of the class. We're not going to do formal agreements because that's hard to facilitate in a virtual space, but we wanted to start with an invitation. Today we invite you to stay curious. So approach this content, the contributions that we're making, you're making in the chat. We love the engagement in the chat. I will say that I am not very good at multitasking and talking and reading at the same time. So I probably will minimally engage in the chat until we get to the Q&A portion. But yes, approach everything with curiosity. When you're skeptical, if you want to ask questions, tell me more, share perspectives. And welcome. We want to acknowledge, I can see from the people who are logging or sharing their introductions that we have a lot of expertise in this room. So yes, Anush and Erica and I are talking with you today from a position of quote unquote authority, but we also recognize that you all have very valuable experience and things to contribute as well. We would also invite you to be open, let those perspectives in. We all have our kind of own individual truths, which can be the intersection of facts, feelings, and experiences. If your truth is challenged, try not to shy away from things that bring you discomfort, but instead examine them, sit with them. There's really not a right or wrong. Just something to notice. And that's a quote from a mentor that Erica and I got to work with earlier this year. And it was like her favorite saying, no right or wrong, just something to notice. And that's something that I try to adopt in the interactions that I have as well. And then also, very important, considering both intent and impact of the things that we are saying, the things that we are sharing. And with that in mind, we also want to acknowledge that the content of this webinar and the other two that we'll be doing as well, each individual topic is an entire field of study. And there are lots of books and articles and entire courses that are dedicated to them. And we will give the disclaimer that our goal is to not go super deeply into each topic, but we are really focused on sharing how each of these relates to teens and how they show up in our library spaces, how they might interact with us as library staff members. And as Kate mentioned, we will mention lots of studies and articles and videos and various things that we won't go into deeply in this class, but that handout that she linked to has links to pretty much all of them. And if there is something that we happen to mention that we forgot to include in the resource, our email addresses will be available at the end of the presentation as well, and you're welcome to reach out to us and we're happy to share more. I will give a couple of other disclaimers. A content warning, please take care of yourself. You've mostly already done this, but we do not want you to turn your screens on. I'm happy to just talk to Anush and Erica this whole time. Makes me more comfortable. But do take care of yourself. We're going to be covering quite a bit of kind of heavier material, especially with everything that's happening outside of the work world today. Take care of yourself. Our goal is not to wreck your day. I recognize we all have to go to work after this. So if you get partway into this and you're like, you know what, I think I need to watch this later, we won't be offended. So please take care of yourself. And also just an acknowledgement that a lot of the issues affecting teens today have been politicized. So some of the content in this presentation may feel political due to the nature of those issues, but that is not our intent, mostly just to share the reality of the world that the teens that we're working with are facing and what they're growing up with. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
So we wanted to start off with some interactive questions, as much as we're comfortable with talking sometimes. It really kind of depends on the day. We also recognize that just talking at people for 45 minutes isn't the most fun in most situations. So as we're getting into the content, what we wanted to start with was this idea of what do you like most about working with youth or teens, and what do you find most challenging? And we would love for you all to answer those questions in chat. We'll go through and we'll answer them for you as well. We're not going to ask you to do something that we're not ready to do ourselves, usually. But yeah, we would love to hear from you. This gives us kind of some insights into some of the challenges you're facing, but it also gets us into this mindset to really be thinking about youth and teens and those experiences that they're having. So since my microphone is unmuted, I guess I'll start us off. What I like most about working with youth or teens, as a couple have already noted, is their creativity. They are so incredibly creative, both in what they make, but also in how they think about things. I'll share my most recent favorite story that just happened this last week. I had a teen, I was on a school visit making library cards, and I had a teen who made a library card and very excitedly asked me if we have Titanic in our catalog, because back before Leo, with exactly that inflection, Leonardo, was problematic, he was magnificent. And the way that she was thinking about that was just really fun to listen to. They say the greatest things. And the things that I find most challenging sometimes is that they're saying the greatest things. And you're wondering, where did this come from and how do I respond in a way that encourages and doesn't stymie? And also, how do I make sure that I'm lifting up their voice as opposed to being too loud myself? So Catherine or Anush, you get to chime in now.
I realized that you actually were not listed for that, and I just forced you to take that. We're sorry about that.
Spotlight.
It's fine. I think a lot of what people are sharing in the chat really resonates. There's a reason a lot of us get into teen services or stick with teen services. I would echo that. Their passion and creativity, the forming into getting to watch them figure out what they are going to believe as adults, or challenging some of the things that they've known. I appreciate that. The thing that I find most challenging, and we've been dealing with it a lot lately, is actually more managing the expectations of adults around teens. That's something that I find really difficult in working with them. And I think it makes us sometimes hyper aware of the judgments that are being made, and especially if they are, as was brought up in the meeting yesterday, energetically and enthusiastically greeting their peers in the library in a way that people find unacceptable is it's always challenging for me, and it makes me extra anxious on their behalf. So yes.
I'm just going to echo what Catherine said. Love seeing them use the library and express themselves and, come out of their shell for a lot of them. And as someone who does not like conflict, I really sometimes dislike being that middle person trying to defend the teens while also, understanding that teens are not the only people using the library.
Now it is.
Now it is.
Now it has my name in the notes. I want to acknowledge real quick your answers. I've been kind of scrolling through chat. They're coming fast and furious, which I love. But I love how there's this common theme, that passion, that creativity, and that there is this very clear desire to lift them up and advocate for them, which I think is what I was trying to say. How do you advocate for teens, but also give them the tools to advocate for themselves? And so as we're talking through this series, I think that's one of the things that is kind of our goal, to think about what they're experiencing and how do we then use that to better our understanding and better the services that we're giving to them. So today we are talking about intersectional factors affecting teens. So as we get into this, we want to recognize intersectionality as a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. It's a framework for understanding how groups and individuals' social and political identities are unique combinations, right? We all come to experiences with lenses that have been created by our identities, by the identities that we assign to ourselves and the identities that others assign to us. And so this can result in unique combinations of discrimination and privilege. most of the things that we're discussing today, they don't exist in isolation. Very, very few of us are just one thing or another. And so as we're thinking about that, there is quite a lot of overlap. We've, for the sake of instruction, broken these things down into different sections, but they are all intersectional. And so one of the questions that we'd like you to add in chat now, you can absolutely continue the conversation that we've already started. But our next question for you is to think about what are some factors, both internal and external, that might affect teen behavior and how they're showing up in our libraries. And we're going to go into some of those now.
Okay, so we will start with the biological factors. And this is something that a lot of us might already know, might have already seen when learning how to work with teens and learning about teen brain development, is that, teen brains are still developing. Their prefrontal cortex is still in the process of developing, and it affects things like the ability to plan ahead and impulse control, understanding consequences of their behavior and appropriateness of that behavior. And I saw that a lot of people post message in their messages said that sometimes they can be disrespectful or a little unaware of their behavior. So a lot of their decisions might be made in the amygdala, which controls adrenaline, aggression, mood swings. And sometimes that can be like, a toddler at story time who has a meltdown. They're not really doing it on purpose. It's not a deliberate choice. They're not there to ruin everyone's day. So one thing that we should also remember is that sometimes teens have a hard time understanding facial expressions in adults. So, they might, something that is a neutral expression, they can be interpreted as like you being angry with them. So it's important to not just use our body language, but use our words. And another thing that might affect that more is COVID, because a lot of the teens spent most of their childhood in masks and they did not really get to see a lot of facial expressions. And another big thing is sleep. And this is something we might have already heard. The National Sleep Foundation recommends that teens get 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night and sometimes up to 11 hours. And this isn't always possible because they might not get sleepy until midnight and they have to wake up early to go to school. So the National Sleep Foundation reports fewer than 2 in 10 teens say they get the recommended amount of sleep, whether it's on a school night or the weekend. And we won't really go much into puberty, but something to remember is adultification can really be affected with that. So puberty does not only just affect their behavior, but a lot of teens are hitting puberty younger, as many as young, especially teen girls, as young as 9 or 10. And this can affect our perceptions of their age. So sometimes we might think that they should be old enough to know, but maybe they're not.
All right, so neurodiversity. I have seen a couple of responses in chat about neurodivergence already, which is kind of right in line with some of the things we're going to talk about. To start with a very basic definition, so we're all kind of on the same page, that this is what we have in mind as we're talking about this section. Neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world in different ways, many different ways, right? There is no one right way of thinking or learning or behaving, and differences aren't viewed as deficits, or at least I don't like using the word should. I try not to use the word should too often. However, it feels appropriate in this instance. Differences should not be viewed as deficits. Unfortunately, sometimes they are. And that's a bias that we have to kind of recognize in ourselves sometimes. And so as we look at this slide, we can see there's a wide range of different types of neurodiverse labels, neurodiverse identities. One of the questions that we've gotten before is whether the colors coordinate with each other, or whether they match. And the answer to that is no, we don't think so. So it's mostly just a design choice. That's a great question though. So I figured I'd go ahead and answer that before we get further into this. One of the things that we are seeing with teens and adults really, and youth, is a higher rate of diagnoses. And this is for a couple of reasons, right? In part, there's a greater understanding, right? Which is awesome. Like 20, 30 years ago, however old I am, when I was in school, had we known what we know now about neurodiversity, I might have had a very different experience. And so it's really cool that we have this greater understanding and can put more supports into place. There's also greater testing and some additional ways to test, right? And so that just means that we're seeing more neurodivergent people. I mean, we've always been here, right? But we're seeing it more and we're acknowledging it more. And it's really awesome also that the teens know this, like, and they have language to speak for what they're experiencing. Really cool to see. Unfortunately, that doesn't always mean that we have greater services or resources for this population. And sometimes we see that all over the place, right? One of the articles in the handout that we shared with you just very recently came out and focuses on a school and the experiences that some of the teens and the students there are having who are neurodivergent and don't necessarily thrive in a tightly controlled environment. And so they get suspended more often, or they get disciplined more often. And that's something for us to think about when we're thinking about neurodivergent teens in the library. What kinds of behaviors are sometimes getting labeled as problems, or are teens acting out that might really just be them expressing their neurodiverse experience of the world. When we are witnessing those, then it's important for us to check in with ourselves and think about what expectations do we have here and why do we have those expectations? One of the things that Anish mentioned is that it's often a struggle to balance. This teen is having this experience right now, and there are other people in the library, and the other people in the library might be the ones who are getting upset. So how can we advocate for they both have exactly the same right to be there? What is a personal, think about what is a personal annoyance perhaps, versus what is something that is actually needing some kind of address. And we can really think about this when we think about our patron codes of conduct and who do those codes of conduct benefit, and who are they written for? Are they written for our neurodivergent patrons, or are they written for our neurotypical patrons in mind? And where are those times when we maybe need to do some adjusting? Oh, I almost forgot about this part. This is a new part. I'm very excited. So one of the things that we've been doing in ALD libraries, I'm super excited about both of these things because I've gotten work on both of them with Anush. We've put together sensory kits for our teen spaces. So these are backpacks that have different sensory items, different types of fidgets, all sorts of different types of fidgets, right? Stimulating, calming, squishy, all of those things. And we just put them in the teen spaces. These are not for checkout. They are for teens to use in that space. And we've seen them get used. We also put together some programming kits. So the same kind of sensory kit, but specifically for programs. And we are actually right now working on inclusive programming guidelines so that as we are building our programs, we are keeping inclusivity in mind. Really excited about some of those things. And what we'd love for you all to do now is to share in the chat what you are doing in your libraries as well. We'd love to hear more. I mean, not gonna lie, sometimes this is because we're looking for additional ideas. But also we want to celebrate what you all are doing in your libraries. We had that we were going to share out 3, but I wonder if we should give some time to respond and then a list of items we include in those sensory kits. I think we could add that to, we can add that to the handout somehow and get that shared out. That's a great question.
If you're local to the Denver metro area, I'll just put in a plug for the Autism Community Store, which is located over in Aurora. It is a wonderful resource, and we were able to actually work with them and feedback from our teens to purchase most of what we have. For those sensory kids, if that's not a realistic field trip for you to make, then you know the evil Amazon has many of the other things that we purchased as well. But they are a really wonderful store. I'm not sure if they have an online storefront, but they do have the weighted animals, which are the like most popular thing that we have in those kits, are actually made by autistic community members. And so if nothing else, go and make a field trip to Denver or Aurora and go see their weighted animals. They're wonderful.
They do have an online presence. They do have an online store. I haven't ordered anything through their online store. But I will say that their website is really great in that it divides up their items. And so it adds like tags. Thank you for sharing the link in the chat, Emma, I think. So it'll you can access, depending on what kind of fidget or what kind of support tool you're looking for, you can find, they have those kind of tagged and broken into different lists. And there's lots of overlap, right? But really, really great.
But we can absolutely put together a list of what we have in our kits and share them with you. We have a set of kits that we keep in our teen spaces, and then we also have kits that travel and go to every program with us that have a bit more in them. So more now noise canceling headphones and sunglasses and things like that as well. So yes, we can absolutely share that after. Thank you.
I want to shout out
Kate, thanks for sharing the podcast, because I was trying to remember the name of it.
Yes. I had that pinned to watch that. Real quick before we have to move on to the next section, I do want to shout out, we got an answer to that question that was really great about having diverse seating in the teen spaces. That's something that we've been kind of talking about and how to make that happen. So it's so cool that you're doing that in your space, and I wanted to make sure to amplify that.
Okay. Like I said, we could spend all day talking about every one of these topics, but we're going to move on. And we will talk about poverty. So unlike the others that we've talked about so far, poverty is an outside force that is beyond the control of teens, that has a huge impact on every facet of their lives. In the handout that is linked on the website that Kate shared earlier, there are several really great resources. Some of them are a little older, but there's like a Growing Up Poor Kids, which I think was a PBS, and then Growing Up Poor in Colorado, which was a few years old. But just kind of sharing some statistics. So these statistics are from the Kids Count Colorado report. According to that most recent report, which shares demographic information on a variety of topics impacting youth in Colorado, specifically 1 in 9 children were living in poverty in 2023. This number hasn't changed that much for 2024, actually, when we were looking at some of those things. I personally would just like to point out that the poverty line is defined as $30,000 income for a household of 4. And as someone who makes more than that and still sometimes feels like I'm struggling financially, I would also say that there are many, many more children and teens in Colorado who are experiencing what I would consider poverty or challenges with finance, which as we know as adults, bleeds into every part of your life, than the statistic might show us. So just kind of keep that in mind. They have what I would consider a ridiculously low number to be considered below the poverty line. And in terms of demographics, which is the other image that's on the slide, children of color are more likely to be living in poverty. Another statistic that is available, and I believe is linked in the handout as well, is from the Trevor Project, and it found that LGBTQ plus youth are more likely to experience homelessness and housing instability than their straight peers. So what does this mean for our library services? I think we all know now more than ever, as we're seeing other public funding get cut, or even having our own funding cut, that we are one of the few places that remain in the community where it is free to go, and we don't expect people to pay anything to be there. As a result, and what we're seeing in our area is certainly an influx of teens who are looking for that third space in the community, who can't afford to hang out somewhere that they're going to ask them to buy something. And so some nights at some of our libraries, we have 30, 40, 50 teenagers, high school students, who are there because it is the place that they can be, and that they can afford to be. So thinking about things like the digital divide, I think it's been interesting in sort of a coming through as we've worked through COVID. I feel weird saying post-COVID because I think it's just kind of always with us. But coming through some of the things that we started to see in terms of accessibility for the digital divide, things like increased internet access. Many of our schools went one-to-one with devices, so kids now do have devices. One of the things that our library did was actually changed our policy so that our Wi-Fi is on 24 hours, and we have Wi-Fi extenders into the parking lot. So even if the buildings are closed, people can come and sit in the parking lot or on a bench outside and continue to use our Wi-Fi. Whereas before we shut it down when we closed. So thinking about those sorts of access, I think it's important for us to remember as library staff that we aren't making judgment calls about what's important or not for teens to be doing, especially when they're using our digital resources, our computers, our internet. That yes, access for schoolwork is important, but recreational activities are just as important, and access to those things. And so it's not on us to say the game that you're playing on a computer or whatever it may be is less important than something that someone else needs to do. Many of our teens experiencing poverty, as I mentioned, don't have safe spaces to go in their neighborhoods. And so the library can be that safe third space. There are a few studies that show that teens experiencing poverty have fewer opportunities for social interaction. So again, the library has the opportunity to be that space for them to have, as one of my managers said yesterday, those enthusiastic and very social interactions with one another. Many libraries are providing free snacks, but I think that's also a great opportunity to find opportunities to partner with community partners. We have a really great local organization called the Backpack Society that we have been able to partner with, that leave food, both snack type food and shelf stable food that kids can take every week. And we don't really have sign up requirements for it. We don't track anything. It is just a take it if you need it kind of situation. So look for those sorts of organizations within your community as well, and see where you might be able to partner if you have more limited resources yourself to be able to offer those things. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how immigrant and refugee status might be affecting teens. So I have some demographic information from the Colorado Refugee Services Program. And it shows the countries of origin where immigrants have been coming from, and or refugees, and their ages. So the younger kids might already be using the library, and the parents, some of them might not. And the teens hopefully are also using the library. So some of the stressors that might be affecting refugees is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And I think that some of those might be affecting teens who are, or immigrants who are not just refugees or have refugee status. So there could be traumatic stress from displacement, poverty, and the migration, the resettlement stress, so financial stress and transportation difficulties, finding adequate housing, and acculturation stress, which is conflict between children and parents over their cultural views. There might be cultural misunderstandings, having to serve as a translator for family members. We see that a lot. And when we go to big community events and, trying to fit in at school. There could also be isolation stress from losing that social support network. And there's, currently also the stress from negative views of refugees and asylum seekers from some members of the community and, the outside world in general. So the way that these stressors can affect teens is, again, from the child traumatic stress network, they could have a sense of responsibility or guilt over the things that have happened, feelings of shame or embarrassment, helplessness, changes in how they think about the world, and problems in relationships, including their peers, family, and teachers, conduct problems. So they can affect really how teens are perceived in the library. So there might be some issues following directions. There could also be a distrust and sense of helplessness around American institutions. So it's important to be aware of that and try to be welcoming to teens, especially those who might be English language learners.
So we talked about some biological factors, and mental health is certainly a biological factor. This is kind of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time. When you're looking at these statistics, one of the things that we really wanted to point out is the disparity among different marginalized groups. Because while we know that all of our teens are experiencing mental health, the availability of treatment and support is unfortunately not standardized across those groups. So when our teens come in, we can hopefully provide some of that support. Just like with neurodiversity, diagnoses of depression have increased, again, in large part because of an increase in understanding and awareness and acknowledgement that teens and youth can have depression. That is a fairly recent acknowledgement in the grand history of things. And so we have an increase in testing as well. And when we're thinking about outside factors that could be impacting mental health, our teens are experiencing some pretty serious things. Gun violence, school shootings. So whether they feel safe, 13% of US high school students reported not attending school within the previous 30 days when responding to the 2023 Youth Risk Behavior Survey because they didn't feel safe. Gender, sexuality, race, and ethnicity can play a part in how safe students feel attending schools. Teens today also have relationship pressures, body image conversations and feelings, and a growing pressure to feel like they are supposed to be fixing what's wrong in our society. So climate change, politics, racism, they have a worry about the future. I saw that noted a couple of times in the chat as well. They're definitely feeling that.
Body image is another huge contributor to mental health as well as physical health and many other things for teens. A 2020 study found that 61% of adolescents, regardless of gender identity, reported experiencing body dissatisfaction, including concerns about weight, acne, and other aspects of their physical appearance. All of these things can lead to disordered eating, isolating themselves socially, and mild to severe depression. Something that we teach when we're teaching this class with staff in our libraries is that experts suggest avoiding even positive praise for looks because it reinforces messages that when someone looks good, they are more valuable. And so usually what the conversation that we have is like, just stop and consider. It's great to offer compliments to teens. It's a really great way to start building relationships. It's a great way to break the ice, but your compliments do not have to be about their physical appearance. If you are going to compliment on their physical appearance or comment on their physical appearance, make it about something that they have complete control over and have made as a choice. So like if they've chosen to make their hair rainbow colored, amazing. I love rainbow colored hair. If they have incredible nails, I love nail art. I'm not good at it, but I love looking at it. And so I will often be like, I love your nails. So think about something that they do have control over, and not something that they don't have control over, because as much as it might reinforce something that we don't know about for that kid, it might also have an effect on the kid who's not receiving those compliments and hearing, and they never get compliments on how good they look or something like that. So something to keep in mind. There's more and more research, as I mentioned, that even boys, male identifying folks, experience things like disordered eating. There was John Shu's really impactful Louder Than Hunger, which was a novel in verse that came out last year about a 12-year-old boy with an eating disorder. So we're seeing more in literature. Highly recommend reading that one when you're in a place to read it. It's a heavy hitter. And then relationship pressures. It was mentioned several times, people's peers, family relationships. I think most people we immediately go to and think about romantic relationships affecting teens. But just as important can be those peer relationships, their friend groups, their family dynamics. I am currently reading Hannah Sawyer's new book, Truth Is, which is another novel in verse. If you haven't read it, she's the author of All the Fighting Parts. Again, really good, but there's a passage in there where it talks about the fact that everyone prepares you to break up with your first like crush or boyfriend or girlfriend, but no one ever tells you what it's like to go through your first best friend breakup and the tragic feeling that is. And that really hit me as I was reading it, stood out in that, because that's a huge theme. And for kids, that can really impact whether they're feeling isolated, whether they feel like they have anyone they can closely connect with, but also, do they have a responsible parent or caregiver in their lives, or are they having to take on that role themselves? That can have a huge impact on their mental health, again, and many other things. And according to the latest Youth Risk Behavior Survey, female and LGBTQ plus high school students were more likely than their peers to experience violence of any kind. So nearly 2 in 10 female students reported experiencing sexual violence by anyone, and nearly 1 in 10 shared that they had been forced to have sex. And according to the 2024 mental health survey from the Trevor Project, 49% of LGBTQ plus youth experienced bullying in the past year. And I don't have the statistics, but I do live in an online world, and I know that those numbers are increasing right now, is what we're seeing. So just kind of something to keep in mind as we are thinking about how to support our youth.
These are both some Colorado specific resources and some national resources for teens who are, whether they're experiencing a mental health crisis or they just need a little bit of extra support. One of the reasons that we think it is so important to talk about these things is because it removes stigma. We're seeing some really good steps in this area. We really are, but it's really important to keep that momentum going, especially with all those pressures that we've been talking about that the teens are feeling. In the recent Healthy Kids Colorado study, we did see a small decrease in the number of students reporting depression and suicidal thoughts, which could be a really great sign. Here in Colorado, we have the Safety Tell in some of our schools, which is if you're getting bullied or you're having issues, whatever those concerns might be. Recent statistics showed that the number of calls to Safety Tell almost doubled last year. which is great because it means that teens are feeling comfortable asking for help. And so it's important that we also feel comfortable talking about these things and having some of those resources and having some of that understanding ready to go if they need us.
All right, so the kind of final section we're going to cover, because we can't not talk about it. I don't know about y'all, but it's a almost daily conversation that I get to have with adults who don't work with youth very much anymore. But it goes something like kids these days, and which I think has always been a refrain. But it is one of those, like, it seems like they're worse. It seems like they act out more. It seems like they don't know things that they should. And then I get to have a little conversation with them about it's not just an it seems. It's a thing that we're learning statistically that exists. So we're seeing numerous impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in teens today, from developmental delays to loss of social regulation skills, even loss of fine motor skills. One of the studies that's linked in the handout is a survey of teachers that shared that they had seen, I think it was like 97% or 93% of elementary school students who had a significant loss of fine motor skills. So things like cutting with scissors, they just had kind of lost that confidence. So thinking about that in some of our library stuff, it's really important for us to give them things and let them cut out the crafts themselves. My instinct is usually, I do sewing classes, to pre-cut everything because I want it to be just so for them. But it's actually really important for us to give them opportunities, even at the middle school level, to do that. So, I mean, all kinds of things. We're seeing increased depression. It will likely be years before we realize the impact of just the first year of lockdown on youth development. But already, and one of the things that's linked in there is basically it's like a book that was put together of various studies that were done in the last few years about some of these delays and losses. And so if we consider, and this is one of those that puts into my perspective in my brain at least, that sixth graders today were, I believe, in kindergarten. This year's sixth graders were in kindergarten or first grade. In 2020, their learning has been disrupted for their entire time in school, and they really have never had what we would call a quote unquote normal school experience. So things like, we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about things like social emotional learning and the important role that we can play in that, but things like self-regulation skills, as we mentioned in the chat, is that ability to focus, to control their impulses, switch between activities, and remember multi-step instructions. A lot of that has been lost, or not completely lost, but is very significantly delayed from where historically teens, especially young teens, should be. So what we're seeing is like a sixth grader who has the self-regulation skills of like a third grader sometimes. Very different approaches to working with those age groups. There's a reason I work with teens and not third graders, but we're kind of having to adjust the way that we interact with them and our approach, thinking about how are we giving instructions, what are we asking of them when they follow instructions, those kinds of things. Things like cooperating with their peers, we're seeing affected quite significantly as well. So all of that to keep in mind, but we will focus for a few moments more specifically on the social emotional learning piece, regulation piece.
Yeah, so we've definitely noticed some emotional regulation issues at the schools we visit and the library. So there's been some fights happening. We've seen teens being, deliberately offensive to staff, intentionally trying to get asked to leave the library, which is the one that I find the strangest. But it's important to understand that punishing those behaviors does not really teach those skills. And there's definitely the staffing and time limitations to consider. What we hear from staff is that we don't really have the time to sit with them and teach them those skills. But it also means that punishing a behavior and then expecting it to change because of that punishment is not going to work, and it's going to be frustrating, and it might drive away the teens. And one strategy is to model emotional regulation ourselves. So it's okay for us to admit if we overreacted or if we did something wrong. And it's okay to apologize to those teens and to start over, and using that influence rather than control. There So, it really comes down to us using those things ourselves, and it's not going to be an overnight fix. Social emotional learning takes a lot of time. I know schools are trying, they're not really, able to do that overnight either. So it's just a process. One thing we've been seeing a lot is the teens or the staff being really frustrated because they have to tell the same teens not to do the same things over and over again. So they say, like, they'll listen for 5 minutes and then it'll be the same behavior again. And one thing that is important to remember is that they are not necessarily doing that on purpose. They didn't just decide to ignore the rules. It might be something that they just forget, and having that patience to tell them multiple times and not to assume that they are intentionally trying to make us angry.
So, as a teaser, we will talk a little bit more about some potential strategies and things for working with these youth in our third webinar of this series, which is, I think, October 29th. It's sometime at the end of the month. So join us for that or watch the recording. Anyway, so again, this is very high level. These were a few of the intersectional factors that we felt it was important to talk about, but we also acknowledge that there are many, many more. And so we want to have, before we get into the Q&A portion, we wanted to take just a moment to have you all share, like, what have you seen in your community related to these or other intersectional factors, some things that you have tried personally as a library staff member or that your library is doing. So we also acknowledge that as a kind of suburban library system, our experience is very different. We have a couple of rural libraries where we're seeing things, but experiences of youth and everyone varies greatly depending on where you are. So if you'd like to take a moment to share what you're seeing in your community, anything we missed, something you think would be valuable to highlight, I'm always happy to do more research and edit my presentation. Sometimes it is a challenge to have them come into the library, absolutely. Sometimes it goes the opposite direction and you're like, how did you all discover that the library was here all at once? That's what we're experiencing at some of our libraries right now. So. Awesome.
We've had 3 questions come in specifically for you guys. So if you want me to start in on those, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. So the first one, it says, can you explain or give examples of behaviors that might be expressing a neurodivergent experience versus acting out or breaking the rules? I wonder about some of our teens and their neurodiversity, but that still doesn't make vandalism. And they give a couple examples: tagging our building, stabbing holes in the couch. Doesn't make that okay. How do we work with correcting behavior without inflaming the situation?
That's a great question. um, One of the behaviors that I have heard asked about most often is vocalizing, not just with neurodiverse teens, but with disabled teens as well. Sometimes there can be a loud noise that's expressing excitement. And that can sometimes be misunderstood because sometimes there's a thought that teens especially need to be quiet in the library. I like when people are louder in the library when it's because they're excited. But that's one of the things that's one of the behaviors that I've heard consistently be asked about. And I think one of the things to consider in that situation is watch, what are they doing? Are they vocalizing because they're excited about something? Because if they are, then that's something that they're not necessarily aware of how loud it might be. If it becomes disruptive, then you can go chat with them, or you can offer a different space for them to be in where they can be a little bit louder. I know space concerns are sometimes an issue. Trying to find a space where they can go. Those specific examples, the poking holes in the couch, and tagging for sure. Some of the things that I've seen done in other libraries as I've been kind of researching neurodiverse teens and what are some library offerings, having a graffiti wall inside as an activity that's not even necessarily out every single day. Maybe it's out once or twice a month or once a week, but having some kind of alternative, and then they kind of look forward to it and they know that it's going to be there, and there's some of that ownership there. I love that idea. I would love to implement that idea. And the poking the holes in the couch, kind of a similar thing. I've seen that some other libraries have offered some different types of fidgets where you can kind of stab holes in them. We see a lot of students doing this in papers, like while we're doing presentations in schools. I personally, I don't actually mind when they do that, but when it's your couch, it's a different thing. You could try giving them paper as an art and crafts project. I've seen that done also, or memory foam, or some other kind of, I saw one place, I don't know how well this works, but I saw one place that like basically squirted out a whole bunch of hot glue into like a pad almost. Sorry, you can see my fidget in my hand right there. Into almost like a circle, and then gave them something that they could stab with it. So I guess sometimes thinking outside of the box to the same kind of experience, but with something that they can destroy. That's been an approach that I've been seeing a lot.
I see
Which-
those called picky pads, and you can actually
Yes.
put stuff in the glue that they can pick out of it. So
Yeah.
it's intended to be destroyed. So put like pony beads in it or sequins
Yeah.
or whatever. And
Picky pads are amazing. You can also have a program where they make their own picky pads. And they do have reusable picky pads, which is great. And they have some alternatives that there's one that has like, it almost looks like a perler bead template, but the spikes are a little bit longer, and there's like a, for lack of a better word, it looks like a stretchy worm almost, but you can wind it through. And that's a great reusable picky pad substitute as well.
So going back to the initial, like the question whether it is like a new like neurodivergent behavior or it's something that they're doing intentionally, I think it would be helpful not to automatically assume that they're doing something bad intentionally. So, like some of the things we saw is like a kid just banging the mouse and the keyboard on a table and possibly breaking library equipment. But I think it's, instead of just assuming the intent, try to ask a question and then maybe redirect that behavior. So if they're doing that, maybe they do need a fidget, maybe they need something that they can destroy, as Catherine and Erica talked about. But I think just in any case, instead of just punishing that behavior, trying to understand what would be helpful in that situation.
And I will also acknowledge, I think we forgot to mention at the beginning, we do have the privilege of working for a pretty well-funded district. So things like, and I know like the concern about having your fidgets destroyed or stolen, we actually have a budget built in. We hope that if they become attached to a fidget, they'll take it home with them if they find it useful. But I know that that's not realistic. So finding some of those lower cost alternatives would certainly be something I would recommend for how they destroy things. Yes.
So we have a couple more questions. I do want to acknowledge we are at time, and so we will all stick around and go ahead and address those 2 questions. And then if anyone has additional questions, you can please put them in the chat or stick around for a little bit if you'd like. I know some folks can't. We will keep the recording on through those questions so that you'll be able to come back and listen to those and answers later that our wonderful presenters are going to give their feedback on. So if you need to go, we totally understand. And there is a survey link in the chat if you'd be willing to fill that out.
I forgot to share my wonderful cats and hats slide for questions. I totally forgot I had them. Anyway, here's our email addresses as well if you want to reach out to us directly, please do.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I just wanted to let you know we do read every one of those surveys. We use them 2 different ways. One is that we provide quantitative data to our federal funder. And then we read through every single survey and listen to our participants about how we can continue to improve this series, Talking Teen Services, and the diversity of our offerings. So I also share a summary of that with our presenters so they get to see that information too. So I just want to say I really appreciate everyone coming today, and don't forget to take care of yourself and others. And thank you for being so engaged. And like I said, I'm going to continue to feed those 2 other questions to our panel, our presenters today, so we can keep those on the recording. So, okay, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Had to fit that part in real quick. Okay, the second question we received in the chat was, one of the things I struggle with is teens in the space bullying each other. I can only listen with half an ear, and sometimes it can be hard to judge when to intervene or if I should, especially if they are walking the line between teasing and bullying. Any advice would be appreciated.
That is challenging. Yes. We have I mean, and I've done this within the last week. We do have a lot of conversations about things like consent, and again, I'll go back to our invitation at the beginning, that intent versus impact, and that idea of, and I think it is important to have those conversations with teens as well. They are at a place where they're old enough to learn that, oh, I didn't mean it that way, isn't always a valid excuse if the impact on the individual is something that is harmful. And so sometimes I think trusting them to be able to learn and to grow and having those conversations with them. Yes, it's hard to walk the line, especially if you're like thinly staffed and you don't have time to be able to have those as individual conversations. But I do think when the opportunity is there to check in with the youth one-on-one, not in a group, pull them aside, check in with the kid who seems to be teased, see how it's landing for them, pull the teasers aside, have that conversation. Because yes, they're all coming to us. Like if you're close to a school, like some of our libraries are, they are bringing with them from the hallways of the school right into the building. Some of those things are just continuing. And so it is our role as the responsible adult in that space to disrupt some of that when we see it happening and have those conversations with youth, I think. But I'll also throw it to Anush and Erica for what they.
No, I agree. I want to emphasize the one-on-one. I think in those situations, one of the most harmful things that can happen is if you are talking about it with the entire group there, that creates kind of a spotlight. And that is difficult. I think sometimes in teen spaces that I've looked at, and we don't have these in our teen spaces just yet, but it would be really, it's something that we have talked about before, but having some community, not norms, but community agreements, that's the word I'm looking for, where, and actually I'm seeing somebody has that or just shared something about that having something about respect and having something to kind of point to where when you're having that one-on-one conversation, you can say, hey, just consider that the way you're saying something might not be landing the way you think it is. It's a good conversation to have. Sometimes it's not always possible, right? And sometimes what I've told teens in my programs is that if I hear something, I mean, I'm upfront with them that if I hear anything that closely resembles hate speech, I'm going to intervene and we're going to have some redirection. And then I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with the person who is saying something. And I've said I'll try to do that also if it feels to me that the vibe is getting upset. And that's in a program is different. I acknowledge that in a program is very different than on the floor. But I think interrupting sometimes, like if you step in, if you have a craft on hand that they can do or something you can ask them to help you with, something that redirects some of that conversation and then gives you the opportunity to step in and have some of those one-on-one conversations, can be a tactic to, at least in the moment, stop it and then go back.
Yeah, I've had both, like speaking to teens individually and also saying something in the moment. And I think it depends on how much of the conversation I've heard and like how sure I am. Like there's been during a program, there were a group of teens who were kind of teasing each other, but it was kind of a sensitive subject. And it was during a program, we were there, we were able to just say, okay, we cannot like have this conversation. It is not respectful to everyone. But you know, if you're kind of half listening, it might sound like it's kind of borderline, then I would, it would like Catherine didn't take the kid aside at some point and ask if, you know, they feel like they were hearing some offensive things and if they would want us to intervene, because sometimes they don't, or sometimes they want us to just give them some tips on how they can handle a situation and they don't want an adult involvement in the moment.
I've acted like something was said to me before as a way to interrupt. Like if I hear something, I'll say, ouch. But again, yeah, I'll just be like, ouch. And again, sometimes that depends on what is being said and what's the environment. And is it an appropriate way to kind of move on to a different conversation? It's really hard because sometimes those things can be so different, situations can be so different. But trying to read, is this something I need to interrupt? Do they seem upset? And then, yeah, like Catherine and Anush were saying, check in later to see, because sometimes you don't think someone's upset and they are. And sometimes you think someone would be upset and they're like, psh, that was hilarious, miss. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, yes, nope. I have been schooled. You are right.
Yeah, they're usually not afraid to tell us when we've been schooled, right? Okay, we've got one more question for y'all. And this one says, I have a large group of teens who come to the library daily and consider it their safe space. Yay. However, their topics of conversation typically revolve around their diagnoses, experience in the psych hospital, abusive home life, and even suicide attempts. Our teen space is wide open and sound travels easily, so I often wonder whether I should be talking to these teens and reminding them that their conversations inside a public library aren't private and might even be triggering for other library patrons. At the same time, I want to be supportive of the teens themselves and what they need. Any advice on what to do in these situations?
I feel you. We do not have very many enclosed teen spaces in our library. I think that's a chronic issue that is systemic of not giving meaningful space to these youth. And we're all fighting that. And it is a tricky balance because it's great to provide a space where they feel like they can talk about those things in a healthy way rather than asking them to bottle it up. And I think gentle reminders that it is an open space and others might hear is also not out of line. But I also, I don't know. Uh, yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead. I see
it's
Anush has
wonderful.
something.
Yeah, I think it's great that they're able to use the library and have those conversations with each other. Is there a way that that could be a program? Because like one of the things that we do in some of our libraries is have like a teen cafe where it is an actual formal program that we can reserve a room for, and it's like just giving them a beverage and letting them hang out. So they're not necessarily doing an activity. Or one thing that we've done is like air dry clay, and as they kind of make something with clay, they can just talk. I think that's a good way to give them the privacy without just like putting them in a room if your library is not allowing teens to book rooms.
I don't know that I have anything more profound to add to what Catherine and Anush said. It's hard. I agree that I think gentle reminders that it's an open space can be helpful. I think one of the things we didn't really talk about when we were talking about facial expressions and that teens struggle to read our facial expressions. Teens also don't always know, and children also for sure, but teens don't always know how loud their voice is or that it's carrying. And sometimes, I mean, I have had this conversation so many times with people who are like, I don't get it. In the same sentence, I can't hear 5 words that they're saying, and I feel like my eardrums are being blasted out of my head, but with the other 5 words. And there's sometimes sometimes that reminder is helpful because they don't realize how loud that is. Yeah, it is fascinating. My own son, all the time, it was like every other word. It would be, I couldn't hear him, and then ouch. I couldn't hear him, and then ouch. To the point where I thought he was doing it on purpose a couple of times. And I'm still not 100% convinced that he wasn't, but that gentle reminder, I think can be really helpful and can be a moment of, oh yeah, there are other people in this space, and I did not actually want to share that information with them. And then sometimes I know that I have had it in a program where they knew exactly how loud their voice was being, and they were doing it intentionally. And that's a different kind of conversation. That's the conversation where it is, hey, friend, I want to hear what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that this is a welcoming space for everybody else who's in here. So come sit here and chat with me, or keep chatting with your friends. But if we can be mindful that there are other people in this space too. And I would ask the same thing of them for you. I try to make sure that I always say that so that it's not I'm singling you out and I wouldn't do this to someone else, but that it's hey, I'd ask anybody the same thing.
I'll just also put a plug in related to this. The mental health first aid training, yes, absolutely. It's great. And there's the new resource from Seattle Public Library, the Nourishing Minds framework that was released within the last few weeks, I believe. I haven't dived deeply into it myself yet, but it is a like mental health support framework for public library staff. And it's built with the idea of like co-creating with youth, a mental health support program. And so I think that could also be a really valuable resource to explore. I believe it's nourishingminds.org. And so would just put a plug in for that one. I have it like pinned right now to really spend some time digging into. Yes, thank you for the link. Y'all are great. I just mentioned a thing and it appears in the chat. Librarians are wonderful. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this one's a tough one too, because I think teens are much more open talking about mental health challenges. And like on one hand, that breaks down stigma, right, around that, for this to be like a normal conversation for them to have. So yeah, definitely, a fine line, because acknowledging that piece that it could be detrimental to someone else in the space who's overhearing the conversation, for sure. So,
Most teens, in my experience, respond pretty well to that because it's that intention versus impact,
right.
right? The intention is
Absolutely.
not to harm someone else. The intention is just to be more open. And so, yeah, I think that can also be that conversation of, hey, I love that you feel comfortable talking about this because we need to see this more. One of the ways that we can help other people break that stigma down is talking about it in a way that feels like it's modeling a positive environment, and being able to modulate sometimes the volume can be helpful. But yeah, I love that they're I love that they are feeling comfortable talking about stuff that, like, when I was growing up, I was specifically told we don't talk about that.
Right. So in that way, I really love those suggestions, because in that way you're acknowledging their efforts to break down stigma and helping them be more aware of their surroundings too. So that's an amazing suggestion. Thank you for that, Erica. So Catherine, did you have anything to add? I just saw you unmuted. So, okay, great.
No, I just forgot to mute.
Oh, just double checking. Okay. Thank you to all of you who kind of stuck around for a little bit so we could talk through those last questions. I really appreciate you being here. So they will be on the recording. So if you have colleagues who had to drop off early, they will be able to watch the last bit with the robust and really wonderful answers we got from our presenters today. So Catherine, Erica, Anusha, I just want to thank you all so much for bringing your experiences and all the research you've done, and your whole selves really to this experience for us. So register for part 2, y'all. So I'm really excited to continue to have them here for 2 more sessions. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you all for being here.